The invisible path. Michael Lennox had always done what was expected of him. He graduated from a prestigious university, secured a position at a respected financial firm in Manhattan, and by 35, had accumulated all the markers of success that his peers coveted: the corner office with sweeping views of Central Park, the tastefully decorated apartment in Tribeca, the carefully curated wardrobe, and a social calendar filled with exclusive gatherings. On paper, his life was enviable. In reality, he was drowning. Each morning, as he stood in his marble shower, he would find himself staring at the water spiraling down the drain, feeling a strange kinship with it. Something inside him, something essential, was being gradually washed away, disappearing into some unknown depth he couldn't access. "You've been distracted lately," remarked Caroline, his girlfriend of 3 years, as they attended a gallery opening in Chelsea. She was perfectly backlit by the gallery lighting, her silhouette forming a golden halo that made her look almost ethereal. "Is everything all right at work?" "Everything's fine," he replied automatically, the words practiced and hollow. He watched her nod and turn back to the artwork, an abstract piece that cost more than what most people made in a year. Around them, conversations hummed with practiced enthusiasm, discussions about the artist's provocative commentary and revolutionary technique, interspersed with updates about vacation homes in the Hamptons and children being accepted to elite preschools. Michael tried to listen, to care, to participate. But increasingly, these conversations felt like elaborate performances, ritualized exchanges with predictable rhythms and expected responses. He found himself studying the faces around him, wondering if anyone else felt the hollowness beneath the polished veneer, or if he was truly alone in his growing awareness. That night, unable to sleep beside Caroline's peaceful form, he slipped out of bed and stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Millions of lights punctuated the darkness, millions of lives being lived within carefully constructed frameworks. How many of those lights illuminated people who felt as he did? How many were awake at this hour, standing at their own windows, feeling the weight of a question they couldn't quite articulate? The first real crack appeared on a Tuesday morning in spring. Michael was sitting through the weekly strategy meeting when his colleague James presented a proposal to invest in a pharmaceutical company that had recently streamlined its operational inefficiencies. "They've cut costs by nearly 18% while maintaining output," James explained, clicking through his meticulously prepared slides. "Stock is projected to jump significantly after next quarter's earnings report." What exactly were these inefficiencies? Michael heard himself ask, his voice sounding strange and distant in his own ears. James faltered momentarily. "Well, primarily workforce redundancies and some research program consolidations. Nothing that impacts the bottom line negatively." "So people," Michael said. The inefficiencies were people. An uncomfortable silence settled over the conference room. His boss, Richard, cleared his throat. "Michael, we can discuss the ethical considerations privately if you'd like. Let's focus on the numbers for now." But Michael couldn't focus on the numbers. Not anymore. He saw faces behind them, faces of people who had received phone calls or emails informing them that they were redundancies. People with families, with dreams, with morning routines and favorite coffee mugs left behind on now empty desks. As the meeting continued around him, Michael felt something shift inside him, a small but fundamental change, like a gear that had been slightly misaligned suddenly clicking into place. The sensation wasn't dramatic, but he knew instinctively that something irreversible had occurred. Over the following weeks, the crack widened. Conversations that had once seemed normal now felt bizarre. Priorities that had once seemed important now appeared trivial. The carefully constructed framework of his life began to show fractures. "You need to get it together," Richard told him after he questioned the environmental impact of another investment opportunity. "This isn't like you, Michael. You've always been a team player." A team player. The phrase echoed in his mind as he rode the elevator down to the street. What game was he playing? What were the rules? Who decided them? And most importantly, why had he accepted them without question for so long? That evening, he canceled plans with Caroline and walked aimlessly through the city instead. The streets were crowded with people rushing from one obligation to another, faces tense with the particular strain of modern existence, the perpetual sense of being slightly behind, of never quite catching up to some invisible standard that kept moving further away. Michael found himself in a small park, where he sat on a bench and watched the sunset paint the buildings gold. An elderly man sat down beside him, unwrapping a simple sandwich from wax paper. "Beautiful evening," the man said, offering half his sandwich to Michael. Michael politely declined the food but agreed about the evening. "Do you come here often?" he asked, the question feeling both banal and genuine simultaneously. "Every day for 20 years, the man replied, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Ever since I walked away." "Walked away from what?" The man gestured broadly. "From all of it. The race. The climbing. The believing that there was somewhere to get to." He took a bite of his sandwich and chewed thoughtfully. "Took me 50 years to realize I was climbing a ladder leaning against the wrong wall. Don't recommend waiting that long, son." Michael studied the man, his weathered face, his simple clothes, the remarkable peace in his eyes. "Weren't you afraid?" he asked. "When you walked away?" "Terrified," the man admitted with a quiet laugh. "But I was more afraid of waking up one day and realizing I'd never really lived at all." He brushed crumbs from his lap and stood. "Fear's not the problem. It's letting fear make your choices for you." As the man walked away, Michael felt an inexplicable urge to follow him, to ask more questions. Instead, he remained on the bench as darkness settled over the city, thinking about ladders and walls and choices made in fear. "I think we should take some time apart," Caroline said over dinner 3 weeks later. She looked beautiful and distant across the table, like a painting of someone he once knew. "You're going through something, and I don't think I can go through it with you." Michael nodded, surprised by the lack of pain he felt. "I understand." "Do you?" she asked, her voice tinged with frustration. "Because I don't. You've changed, Michael. Everyone's noticed. You've stopped trying." "Trying to what?" "To be part of things. To build the life we talked about." She twisted her napkin. "I had lunch with Emma yesterday. She just made partner at her firm. They bought that house in Connecticut. The one with the orchard." Something flashed across her face, a flicker of doubt so brief he almost missed it. "Sometimes I wonder what we're all racing toward," she said quietly, almost to herself. Then she straightened, the moment passing. "But I don't have the luxury of philosophical crises. I have goals, Michael. A plan." "Plans can change," he suggested gently. "Not mine." She gathered her purse. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for," she said. "I really do." As she walked out of the restaurant, Michael realized that for the first time in years, he felt something close to hope. Not because she was gone, but because he was beginning to emerge. The invitation to disconnect came in stages. First, a meeting with HR, where concerns about his alignment with company culture were raised. Then, the gradual exclusion from key projects. Finally, the uncomfortable meeting with Richard, where words like mutual benefit and different direction floated between them like diplomatic euphemisms for a simple truth: Michael no longer fit. He cleaned out his desk on a Friday afternoon when most of the office was already empty. As he placed his few personal items into a cardboard box, he felt neither regret nor anxiety, only a strange, lightweight sensation, as if gravity had subtly decreased its hold on him. James appeared in the doorway, looking uncomfortable. "This is unnecessary, you know," he said. "Just get back on board. Make the right noises. Play the game." Michael continued packing. "Why?" he asked, genuinely curious. "What do you mean, why?" "Because this is what we do. This is how it works." James gestured around them, at the expensive office with its symbols of achievement and status. "This is what everyone wants." "Is it what you want, James? Really?" James's expression flickered with something, doubt, perhaps, or recognition. But it was quickly replaced by a hardened resolve. "Don't go finding enlightenment and thinking you're better than the rest of us, Michael. That's just another kind of pretension." Michael smiled, recognizing the defense mechanism. "I don't think I'm better than anyone. I just can't pretend anymore. There's a difference." James shook his head and walked away without saying goodbye. Michael didn't blame him. There was no shared language anymore, no common ground on which to stand and exchange pleasantries. They had become, in some fundamental way, incomprehensible to each other. The transitional weeks that followed his departure from the firm were both disorienting and clarifying. Without the structure of work, without the relationship with Caroline, without the social obligations that had once filled his calendar, Michael found himself in unfamiliar territory, face to face with himself and the question of how to live. For the first time in his adult life, he experienced true silence. It was terrifying. One evening, scrolling through texts and emails from concerned friends, he paused over a message from Taylor. "Let's grab dinner. I'm climbing the walls in this apartment." Michael stared at those words for a long time. How many dinners had they shared not because they truly wanted to be in each other's company, but because they couldn't bear to be in their own? How many conversations had served no purpose except to fill silence, to postpone the moment when they'd have to face themselves? He thought of Caroline, of their weekends filled with brunches and gallery openings and dinner parties, a relentless parade of distractions they'd never questioned. He thought of his colleagues, their relationships built on competition thinly disguised as camaraderie. They'd needed each other not for connection but for comparison, for validation, for reassurance that they were on the right path because others walked it too. He moved out of his Tribeca apartment and found a simple place in a less fashionable neighborhood. He started taking long walks through parts of the city he'd never explored. He sat in parks and cafes, observing people, listening to conversations with new awareness. Old friends called. Some with concern, others with judgment thinly veiled as care. "We're worried about you," they would say, which often meant, "Your choices are making us uncomfortable about our own." One evening, at a coffee shop where he'd become a regular, the barista, a young woman with intricate tattoos and perceptive eyes, placed his usual order in front of him. "You're different from when you first started coming here," she observed. "How so?" Michael asked. She tilted her head, considering. "Less weight," she decided. "Not physically. But like you're not carrying something invisible anymore." She wiped the counter absently. "My grandfather would say you've stopped holding on to smoke." The phrase struck him as oddly perfect. He had been holding on to smoke, ephemeral definitions of success and fulfillment that dissolved when grasped too tightly, that clouded vision and suffocated the essential. Spring arrived, bringing with it an unexpected complication. Michael's savings had dwindled faster than anticipated. He managed to secure a part-time job at a local bookstore, earning a tiny fraction of what his old salary had been. For the first time since walking away from his old life, he felt a flutter of real panic. Was this whole journey a mistake? The question haunted him during sleepless nights. He'd given up security, status, stability, all the things he'd been taught to value. Some mornings, doubt would cloud his mind like a fog, nearly convincing him to call Richard to ask if there might still be a place for him at the firm. One particularly difficult morning, he found himself standing outside his old office building, staring up at the gleaming windows. It would be so easy to go back, to slip into the familiar routines, to rejoin the world of shared assumptions and clear metrics for success. He was so absorbed in his thoughts that he almost collided with someone exiting the building. "Michael?" It was Taylor, looking polished and professionally put together, but with shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite conceal. "Taylor, I was just..." He gestured vaguely, embarrassed to be caught in this moment of weakness. "Coming back to the fold?" she asked with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "No," he said, the clarity of his response surprising him. "Just remembering." They stood awkwardly for a moment, the gulf between their worlds palpable. "How are you?" he asked finally. "Busy and exhausted," she laughed, but there was something brittle in the sound. "Everything according to plan." "And how does the plan feel?" Taylor's professional mask slipped for just a moment. "Like I'm climbing a ladder and can't look down." She checked her watch. "I'm late for a meeting." "It was good seeing you, Michael." As she hurried away, Michael felt something settle within him. His doubts hadn't vanished, but they had clarified. The fear wasn't about having made the wrong choice. It was about the uncertainty of having made a choice with no predetermined outcome, no external validation. He turned away from the building and walked toward his neighborhood, toward the small life he was building day by day, choice by choice. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't always easy. But it was genuine in a way his old life had never been. Summer faded into autumn. Michael's financial situation stabilized, not through any grand solution, but through a series of small adjustments. He found additional work tutoring high school students in math, discovered cheaper ways to live, learned to need less. He began to understand that freedom wasn't the absence of constraints, but the conscious choice of which constraints to accept. He began to notice others like himself, people who seemed to exist slightly adjacent to the mainstream flow of life. Not outsiders, exactly, but independent observers who participated in society without being consumed by it. There was the professor who came in weekly for poetry collections, who spoke about literature with a passion that had nothing to do with status or acclaim. There was the elderly woman who volunteered at the community garden, who knew the names of plants in 6 languages and laughed with her whole body. There was the young artist who sketched in the park, creating beautiful works that he often gave away to strangers who showed genuine interest. These people didn't form a community in any organized sense, yet Michael felt a kinship with them. They had each, in their own way, stepped out of the collective dream to live by different metrics. They had found something authentic in a world that increasingly rewarded performance over presence. On a crisp October morning, Michael took his coffee to the small park where he'd met the elderly man months before. To his surprise, the man was there, feeding birds with methodical care. "You're still here," Michael said, sitting beside him. The man glanced at him, recognition dawning. "So are you," he replied. "Though you look different now." "Yes, I do feel different." "Let me guess," the man said, tossing another handful of seeds to the gathering birds. "You walked away." Michael nodded. "I'm still figuring out where I'm walking to." The old man chuckled. "That's the secret they don't tell you. There's nowhere to get to. The walking itself is the destination." He studied Michael with keen eyes. "Are you lonely yet?" The question was unexpected but not unwelcome. Michael considered it honestly. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But I was lonelier before, surrounded by people who didn't really see me, or whom I didn't really see, which might be worse." "Solitude and loneliness aren't the same thing," the man agreed. "One is a choice, the other a condition. One clears the mind, the other clouds it." He offered Michael some seeds. "The birds know the difference." Michael took the seeds and scattered them, watching as the birds hopped closer, unafraid. "Do you ever miss your old life?" he asked. "I miss certainty," the man said. "Certainty is comfortable, even when what you're certain about is ultimately hollow." He smiled slightly. "But comfort was never the point of living, was it?" Winter came, bringing holidays that Michael experienced differently than ever before. He declined invitations to lavish parties, choosing instead to volunteer at a local shelter. He sent simple, handwritten cards to old friends and colleagues, not to maintain connections, but to acknowledge the role they had played in his journey. Some responded with confusion or concern. A few, however, replied in kind, tentative messages that hinted at their own growing awareness of the gaps between perception and reality, between what they had achieved and what they truly needed. James, to Michael's surprise, appeared at the bookstore one snowy afternoon in January. "You look well," he said awkwardly, glancing around at the modest surroundings. "I am well," Michael replied. "What brings you here?" James shifted uncomfortably. "Curiosity, I suppose. I wanted to see." He trailed off, then tried again. "The firm's not the same without you." Michael smiled. "I imagine not." "I miss our lunches," James admitted. "The conversations." Michael regarded him thoughtfully. "What about them?" James looked surprised by the question. "I don't know. Just talking. Debating ideas." A flash of honesty crossed James's face. "Lately I've been wondering if I actually enjoy what I do, or if I just enjoy being good at it." The vulnerability in his voice was new. "Sometimes I watch my kids playing and feel like they know something I've forgotten." It was the most genuine thing Michael had ever heard him say. "They're making changes," James continued, shifting back to safer ground. "More emphasis on green investments, ethical considerations. The kinds of issues you used to raise." He looked at Michael directly now. "You were right." "I wasn't trying to be right," Michael said gently. "I was just trying to be honest, with myself most of all." James nodded, understanding more than his words acknowledged. "I should go. Meeting uptown in an hour." He turned to leave, then paused. "Are you happy, living like this?" Michael considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I'm authentic," he said finally. Which turns out to matter more than happiness, in the end. After James left, Michael watched the snow falling outside the bookstore window. Each flake followed its own path, yet together they transformed the city, softening its hard edges, quieting its constant noise, revealing its underlying beauty. There was a metaphor in that, he thought, about individuality and connection, about separation and unity. Spring returned, completing the cycle of seasons since his awakening began. Michael had established a new rhythm to his life, simpler, more intentional, less defined by external measures. His existence was neither perfect nor free from challenges, but it was genuinely his own. He still encountered old acquaintances occasionally, most of whom regarded him with a mixture of pity and unease. He recognized in their expressions the fear that had once gripped him, the terror of stepping away from the known, from the validated, from the collectively endorsed path. Only a few saw what he had actually gained: freedom from performance, from constant comparison, from the exhausting effort of maintaining an identity built to external specifications. These rare individuals would look at him with a different expression, a quiet recognition, sometimes tinged with longing, sometimes with respect. On the anniversary of the day he'd left his firm, Michael returned to the park bench where his conversation with the old man had helped clarify his emerging awareness. The man wasn't there, and Michael wondered briefly if he was still alive, or if he had simply found another park, another bench, another lost soul to share his simple wisdom with. As he sat watching the new spring growth, a young woman hesitantly approached and sat at the other end of the bench. She was dressed in corporate attire, but her expression was troubled, her movements restless. She stared at the small pond for several minutes before speaking. "Do you come here often?" she asked, the question sounding both casual and urgent. Michael smiled at the echo of his own question from a year ago. "Almost every day," he replied. "Ever since I walked away." She turned to him, something like recognition flickering in her eyes. "Away from what?" she asked, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer. Michael gestured broadly, the same gesture the old man had used. "From all of it. The race. The climbing. The believing that there was somewhere to get to." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how," she whispered. Michael nodded, understanding completely. "No one does, at first," he said gently. "That's why it's called a leap of faith." They sat in silence as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park. Two figures on a bench, one who had found his way, and one who was just beginning to look for hers. Not alone, exactly, but separate. Not isolated, but individual. Each walking an invisible path that only became clear with each step taken in truth. And in that moment, Michael understood that this, perhaps, was the final wisdom, that awakening did not separate him from humanity, but connected him to it in a deeper way. That in finding his authentic self, he became better able to truly see others. That in walking alone, he paradoxically became more accessible to those who were ready to walk their own path. The solitude of the awakened was not a punishment or a burden, but the necessary space in which genuine connection could finally emerge, connections based not on mutual illusion or validation, but on the shared recognition of what was real, what was true, what was essential. And that, Michael realized as he offered the young woman a reassuring smile, was worth every step of the journey.